Hello everyone, my name is Joe Olasino and I'm an account executive here at CCSI, Contemporary Computer Services. And again, I wanted to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Today is DRaaS, Disaster Recovery as a Service. And today our practice manager, Joe Goldberg, he'll be presenting and he'll also be demonstrating our Disaster Recovery as a Service offering, which provides flexible and dynamic offerings. For anyone out there who's not familiar with CCSI, I'll just give you a brief overview. We have been in business since 1974, and we have several core competencies that we focus on. One is infrastructure, and that pertains to data center, IPT, voice over IP, wireless, disaster recovery. We have a security practice, and on the security side, we look at real-time breach detection, malware, viruses. We provide risk assessments. We do pen tests, vulnerability testing and assessments. Also, we have expertise around DDoS and DDoS solutions, along with secure mail and endpoint protection. On the cloud side, that's part of our focus today, but today we're really focusing on disaster recovery, but we'll also do migration. So taking customers, prospects that have never gone to the cloud and help them to better understand how do they make that migration to the cloud, what are the steps involved, and what are the associated costs. Also, backup to the cloud and cost containment for people who are already leveraging the cloud. We also do application monitoring solutions, so any key critical applications in-house that need to be monitored or that your customers are hitting and must be up 24/7. How do you know that they're up Friday night, 2 in the morning, or on a Sunday afternoon? So we help with those type of solutions, as well as being an MSP and an MSSP provider. So managed service provider and a managed security service provider. And we also do hardware maintenance. So customers that may have older infrastructure or servers or networking equipment that's no longer, it's end of support by your manufacturer. We also offer feet on the street and break fix repair on those devices. So for today's session, really, if you have any questions, let's keep this informal and please place them in our WebEx chat. And at this time, I'd like to take the opportunity and introduce you to Joe Goldberg.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about disaster recovery as a service and why it's not just for disasters anymore. When you think about it, a disaster is like a hurricane or a flood or something like that. And traditionally, disaster recovery, because of its expense, was for those humongous disasters. But due to the availability of disaster recovery into the cloud, it can actually be used for those smaller disasters like a single server failure. So business continuity and disaster recovery, they're kind of tied together. Disaster recovery would be, your entire site blows up and you're looking like these poor people. Business continuity is continuing to operate your business even in the event of a failure, big or small. So with this solution, we can actually cover both those large and small failures. Just some fun facts talking about downtime. This is from the Right Scale State of the Cloud survey that they do every year. The cost of 1 hour of downtime for a small company on average is $8,000. An hour at a mid-sized company is $74,000, and an hour at a large enterprise is $700,000. So imagine if you lose your primary server for an hour, you're a mid-sized company, that's $74,000 in productivity that you've lost. Lost wages, lost customers, lost whatever. Reputation as well. A good example is WhatsApp experienced 3 hours of downtime and 4 million customers abandoned the service. That's gotta suck, even for a service as big as WhatsApp. And the RTO, which is your recovery time objective. The average recovery time people are reporting is 18 and a half hours to recover from any sort of outage. That's the average amount of time it takes to recover. With a DRaaS type solution, you can be back up and running in as little as 1 hour. So the causes of IT disasters, this is actually something that a lot of people misinterpret. But if you look at the natural causes of disasters, hurricanes, 12% of disaster declarations were from a hurricane, 10% from a flood, 9% from a winter storm. But the most common is a power failure. Car takes out a telephone pole at the end of your block, a substation gets struck by lightning, something like that. IT hardware failure. You lose a UPS, you've now lost your entire data center. You lose a rack of servers, anything like that. Network failure. Your service provider, your internet service provider, or your wide area network service provider goes down for an extended period of time. Software failures. You do a patch update on Patch Tuesday, and most of your servers don't like it. You're just as dead in the water as if your building got hit by a hurricane. Human-caused events, human error, that's a big one. I fat-fingered something as I put it in, a malicious outsider, and then other stuff. But as you can see, it's usually operational or human failure that causes the problems. And it's usually not an entire data center. It's usually a server or a rack of servers that you need to recover, and you don't need to fail over an entire data center. That's a pretty rare occurrence. So what are the drivers to move your DR to the cloud? Most small and mid-sized businesses don't really have a disaster recovery strategy that involves recovering their servers in a quick amount of time, because traditionally you would have to build out a secondary data center, which could cost millions of dollars, or put secondary equipment into a colo facility, but you still need to buy all that equipment and you still need to pay the colo facility. With DR as a service, you can minimize costs because you're only saving an image of all of those servers in very inexpensive storage in the cloud. You're not paying for any compute resources until you actually fail over. You can reduce on-premise infrastructure. You have no on-premise infrastructure to support the disaster recovery. Everything is going to be running in the cloud provider's infrastructure. You can consolidate your sites. You can take, if you have 3 or 4 branch offices that you need to provide DR for, you can DR them all to the same cloud provider and the same place. You don't need multiple DR strategies. And you can remove aging technologies. You don't need to worry about recycling technology and constantly having that capital expense, because the cloud is always going to give you the latest and the greatest. One other reason for disaster recovery, it is the end-all ultimate recovery from ransomware. They talk, and the security folks talk about having the layers of security. This is the final layer of security against ransomware. If it gets past your antivirus, if it gets past your anti-malware and all that stuff and still makes it into your infrastructure and corrupts one of your servers, you can fail over to a previous snapshot that's in the cloud that's pre-ransomware. You can run in the cloud, clean up your server, reformat it, put Windows back on it, and then bring all the data back over the wire, and you're operational during that whole process. So cloud-based disaster recovery solutions offer you more agility. They're fast to implement. It's basically installing agents on the servers and configuring the cloud piece of it. There's no need for in-house disaster recovery infrastructure. There's no upfront cost. It's a monthly pay-as-you-go service. So if you're protecting 15 servers today with a terabyte of storage, that's what you're paying for. If you get rid of 10 servers and you go down to 500 gig the next month, well, that's what you're paying for the next month. There's a reduction of internal resources to support a DR plan. So this could be a single person has this as a tiny part of their job. And once or twice a year, you should be doing a disaster recovery test, which will, take some time. Our NOC will work with you on that, though. You don't need any secondary sites. You don't need any additional physical servers. You don't need any additional physical storage. And you can stop relying on offsite backup tapes for your disaster recovery. So right now, perhaps your disaster recovery is I bring all my tapes to somebody's garage and we restore them in there. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to be thinking about, well, will this tape actually restore? That's always a big fear. So on a very high level technical view, this is how disaster recovery as a service works. You have your VMs in your primary data center, and they replicate over at a very inexpensive storage. And in the event of a disaster, that storage is then spun up, and it becomes an actual instance, a computing instance, a server. And we'll have a plan, a recovery plan in place beforehand, and we'll follow through all the steps that are in the runbook to recover. And then your users will connect either via dedicated VPN or SSL connection or remote desktop, however works best for your organization. And then if you only have like a power failure at your site and then your servers come back up and running on premise, you fail back only the data that's changed. So it will do a delta failback, and you can plan when you actually cut over the failback. So it's not like an emergency thing. You can keep running in the cloud and replicating your delta data back on-prem until it's convenient for you to cut back. In the event of a complete disaster, like a hurricane or a Martian steal your building or something, you can then fail back, rebuild the Windows servers on the other side, and then fail all the data back as needed. Or you could continue to run in the cloud. This also works as a great migration to the cloud service. Two important terms that are involved in disaster recovery is recovery time objective, RTO, and recovery point objective, RPO. And this is, each application is going to have its own unique RTO and RPO. The RTO is the amount of time it's going to take to recover. The faster you recover, generally speaking, the more money the service is. And so some applications, you're going to say, I need that application back within an hour of it being down. Some applications, you might say, you know what? I'm not going to even restore this unless I'm down for a whole day. Recovery point objective is a little bit different. That's the amount of data that you put at risk. So that's how often is the replication going through your primary servers and moving changed data over. So if I were to go down, worst case scenario, I would lose 15 minutes of data, an hour's worth of data, a day's worth of data. Again, different systems have different requirements. The smaller the recovery point objective, the more storage you use, so the more money it costs. And each application and service is different. You know, on recovery time, do I need to be back up and running in 15 minutes, an hour, 4 hours a day? And how much data can I lose? And not all applications are created equally. So you could have like a back-end reporting system that you run reports on once a quarter. You may not care if that comes back. If it's like the third or fourth day of the quarter, you might say, I've got months before I need to worry about using that machine again, so put that at the bottom of the list. But a customer-facing, like web application where customers are ordering stuff for you, you're going to say, I want that back as quickly as possible, and I don't want to lose any data or as little as possible because I don't want to lose any transactions. And then other systems fall in the middle. And we work with you to put together a run book, application by application, of how important it is, what the RPO will be, what the RTO will be, and the process to recover it. And DRaaS offers a superior recovery time objective to backup. With traditional backup on the top here, you're backing up. It takes you however long to do your backups to tape, disk, however you're backing up. A disaster happens, then you have to do a restore. And you're restoring, and you're restoring. But during that restore time, you're not up and running. Everybody's sitting there twiddling their thumbs. Once you're done, then you're up. Then you can turn everything up and running. But it could take you hours, and on large systems, even days, to do a full restore. With disaster recovery, the backups take probably the same amount of time, but you're back up and running in a matter of minutes because you're now running in the cloud. You've converted these images to running instances. And in the case of a complete disaster where you need to do a full restore, you can take those days to restore and you're not worried about it because your users are running in the cloud. So you can take your time, you can do it the right way. You're not like running around with your hair on fire type thing. And DRaaS also means no more RTO trade-offs. It used to be the cheapest way to protect your data was to do an off-site tape backup. Those are time-consuming and not necessarily very reliable. And then you can move up the scale to cloud backup, appliance backup, cold site, warm site, and a hot site DR. A hot site DR was really a Fortune 500 company only thing. Disaster recovery as a service gives you that warm or hot site capability for the cost of cloud backup. So you can get the best of both worlds and really have a full disaster recovery and backup strategy. And just a note, disaster recovery is not backup. Generally with disaster recovery, you're keeping 7 to 14 days worth of snapshots. You can do backup to the cloud as well, and that's also a service that we offer. Or you can continue to use the traditional backup methods you're using now. Those are what you would use to be able to store data for compliance for 7 years, 10 years, whatever is required. And the key benefits of CCSI's DRaaS is there's zero disruption to your operations during testing. Years ago, you would have to schedule a DR test over a long weekend, and you'd have people go to a DR site, you would shut down your primary site, you would turn everything up in your backup site and test everything out and then fail back the other way. With disaster recovery as a service, you can fail over to a test environment while your production environment is still running. So your users have no clue that you're doing DR testing. And then your IT folks and people from each department that has an application can come into the test environment and say, yeah, this is working as I expected it to. And then when you're done, you just destroy the test environment and you move on. With CCSI's Network Operations Center, you're guaranteed to speak to a qualified engineer within 30 minutes, 24/7, 365. All of our engineers are based here in beautiful Bohemia, New York, and they're fantastic. And that 30 minutes is on the long side. I doubt they even get close to that. Rarely. Professional engineering services. We understand that one size really doesn't fit all. We can come in and evaluate your infrastructure for you and determine with you what's going to be the best solution. Which servers do you want to do disaster recovery for? Which ones do you only want to back up? And those that you want to do disaster recovery for, what's your RTO and RPO, and how are we going to design that for you? And that's unique for every customer, so every runbook is unique, and that's part of the service that we offer. For those that it makes a difference for, data sovereignty is assured. We can guarantee that your data will stay in the United States or the country of origin. If, for example, you have a branch office in Germany and the data needs to stay from Germany, needs to stay in Germany, that sovereignty is assured. And we can even guarantee it will stay within a region of a country as well. And we have optional high-touch services where we can provide end-to-end monitoring and visibility and security so that we can actually notify you, hey, we noticed that half your data center is down. Do you want us to initiate a disaster recovery program? We can try to fix issues, do break fix on routers, firewalls, switches, servers, stuff like that. And we can provide visibility for capacity planning and full suite of security monitoring tools to tell you, if you're being compromised or about to be hit with malware or ransomware. And we've been doing this for 40 years in a very unforgiving industry that doesn't forgive mediocrity. We've been around for 40 years providing services to our customers. And thank you for joining the webinar. If there's any questions, please type it in the chat window, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Hey, Joe, we have a couple already. So I have 3 here. 2 look like they're 2-part questions. One is, this company is new to the cloud, so they're not doing anything cloud related today. And they want to know, do some companies, just to get their feet wet, start with email? Absolutely. That's a great way to start. A lot of companies will say, I'm not in the cloud. And then when you drill a little bit deeper, you're like, hey, you're using Dropbox, you're using Google Drive, and they are already in the cloud, or they're using a service like Salesforce that's already in the cloud. But email is a great way to start. You can migrate your on-premise Exchange server to Office 365. It provides your users always the latest version of Exchange,
plus SharePoint. Plus they get all sorts of great tools around anti-spam and anti-malware and archiving and all sorts of stuff that they might need for compliance for a really, really reasonable monthly rate.
And the other one was, do you have, the second part of that question was, do you have any recommendations or previous experience between like Microsoft, Azure, and AWS? What do you find are there any differences between the two?
We're CCSI is cloud agnostic. For the disaster recovery solutions, we've been seeing a lot of customers going to Microsoft Azure. Azure is, they have built-in disaster recovery tools, and they're especially good for Windows. They also can do Linux as well. AWS can do the same thing, but we have to use third-party tools for that. So for customers already in AWS, we would recommend staying with AWS for that solution. If they're already in Microsoft, we can go that way as well. But generally, we go customer by customer and look at their long-term plans in the cloud to try to pick the correct cloud provider. And also you'll see that a lot of customers are now going multi-cloud. They're not wanting to put all their eggs in one basket. So they might do some services out of Azure, some services out of AWS to kind of hedge their bets.
Okay. And then this was the other question, also a two-part question. I'll give it to you fully. What are the onboarding, requirements? So helping someone, get up and get into the cloud from CCSI's perspective, how do we help customers with the onboarding process, and what's a typical time frame with that onboarding process?
Well, for DRaaS, the onboarding process is to get an inventory of their servers, how big their servers are, both in CPU, memory, and disk utilized, and then we can put together an estimate as to how much it will cost on a steady state, just protecting, and then how much it will cost per hour, per day, per month to run it in the cloud. For migrations, if people are looking to migrate to the cloud, we have our own process where we go in and do a discovery and an evaluation and determine which applications or services can move to the cloud and which can't. A good example is if you have like a Windows 2000 server, you can't migrate that to the cloud. So you need to either keep running that on premise or re-platform it, and that can be part of your cloud migration. And then there are some services that you're just never going to move to the cloud. You're not going to move your print servers to the cloud. You're probably always going to want to have an AD server on premise. And there might be some other applications you want to keep on premise, but we can go through all that. As for the disaster recovery, doing the initial evaluation takes a couple of days. Doing the setup also takes probably about a week to do a full setup and also the full DR testing. Because once everything is set up, we're going to want to run through at least one, usually 2 or 3 test failovers to make sure we have the run book correct. So in the event of a disaster at 2 o'clock in the morning, we're good to go.
This is a similar question, Joe, but I think you just addressed it. But the question was, we have several SQL servers. What determines the pricing model? It sounds like you just addressed that based on the requirements.
It's primarily, there's a licensing fee for Azure Site Recovery Manager itself, and you have to pay for the object storage that is going to be storing the actual data, and that's your steady state cost. And then during a failover, that object storage is going to get converted into block storage, which costs a little bit more money. So you're going to pay for the block storage per hour. You're going to pay for the compute to run the server per hour. And then as soon as your failure is over, that environment gets destroyed, and you go back to just paying for the inexpensive object storage.
Well, thank you, Joe. That looked like all the questions that we received today. I want to thank everyone who joined. I appreciate your time. I know it's not easy in the middle of the day, but I hope you found the session very informative. And your account manager will be following up to discuss next steps. Once again, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.